Hey everyone, how's it going? Happy Monday, by the way, to all of you. Um, so what do I want to talk about today? Um, is open source worth the time and effort? That's a question. Um, I tell you, I can give you the answer in one word, and unfortunately, the answer is no. Working on open source projects most of the time is not really worth the effort. The reward, on the other hand, is not really substantial. It's actually nothing. There is no reward. Now, some people might argue that yeah, well, if you go work on open source projects, the employers might notice you, or something like that. I don't know, really. Employers might notice you. The developers who work for company that you're contributing for might notice you, and they might hire you, something like that. If that's the argument, then it's a pretty weak argument because the odds are very, very small to get hired that way. Fact of the matter is, CTOs, recruiters are not they're not browsing open source projects and trying to find they're not trying to find nobody. If there is a company, let's say there's a company called Company X, if there is a Company X and they some for some reason happen to be um, releasing some open source stuff, um, you can go in and then try to understand their product and then try to contribute. The only problem is most of the companies, when their stuff goes open source, is already like it's just already almost done. The code is all already written there. There's a lot of code there. So first you need to understand it. Secondly, um, um, you won't be able to make major changes to that code because there is this whole approval process and all that, right? So you can't just go in, make a change, and then expect it to be merged into their code base. That rarely happens because, um, as someone who takes ownership of the product, I'm gonna accept most merges from people who've been around since the beginning, who I trust. That's the word, who I trust. So if you're gonna go in and contribute to some random open source project, it won't make a difference. Now there is another aspect to it, which is learning. You go, you browse the code base, you try to understand the product. You might learn a few things here and there, and that's it. You might learn few things here and there. When you make changes to this existing project, which is mostly going to be mature, where a huge chunk of code is not going to be merged in. Okay, so that doesn't really help anyone except for the company. If it does end up happening, it doesn't help you as a developer. What you would be better off doing is work on your own project, right? Build your own stuff, create your own script, write your own program, and even then, you don't need to make it open source. There is no reason to make it open source, right? There's like um, maybe someone somewhere might end up using your program, your stuff, your package, one day. But mainly nobody does that because you're so unknown, and there is a lot of stuff already out there, and people are who are releasing the projects, and the projects are becoming big. These people are already well known, in the community. So you trying to go and create a package, it's not gonna be used by anyone. That's for a fact. There's a huge um, amount of code out there written by so many developers, and it almost always goes unnoticed. So trying to contribute to company's product, first of all, is not gonna get you nowhere because this is going to be small changes, right? And the company is not going to be like, oh look, this guy has made some pull requests and all that, let's hire him. That's not going to happen. Secondly, try and learn. Yeah, you might learn a few things, but you'll learn way more if you just um, work on your own project. Even then, you don't need to make it open source. You should need to keep it private. So those are two strong arguments against contributing to open source. People who tryna tell you, oh, go open source, contribute, tell other people about your project, fine. Telling other people about your project is totally fine, right? I do that all the time. Like I'm telling you right now, um, and I post on Medium, on LinkedIn as well. That's totally fine. But tryna get into open source, this is years of work. But even then, there is no guarantee of a reward. Most open source people who contribute to open source don't make a penny. They don't make nothing. Go speak to someone who contributes to open source and ask them how much money are you making from that. They'll tell you straight away probably nothing. You might become uh, um, recognized by other people, but that's it. Like I don't know really what this whole fuss about open source really is. All I know is that people who are telling everyone go open source, they're just selling some sort of product. How to find job through open source. You don't find jobs through open source. You find jobs when you're known in the community. But open source doesn't give you that type of recognition. You'll have way better chances of starting to post stuff on your learnings and stuff on LinkedIn than you would on open source. And and I tell you what, you know what? If you don't believe it, if you think open source has some value, then contribute it for not for a month, contribute it for work on it for like 6 months, a year, and then you might see ins and outs, and you'll realize this is not giving me nothing. So yeah, that's it. Getting hired through open source is almost impossible because nobody is there. They'll hire you. You know who's working on open source anyway? Developers, right? And developers don't have the power to hire anyone. So yeah, I don't think open source is worth it. I would totally say don't waste your time. I would also say if you really want to do something like that, just work on your own project. Um, make it big enough, so you can talk about it. So you can talk about the people. You go to conference, you are on LinkedIn, you're with people around you, so you can talk about it with pride. And then you will have something that you built, so it will give you confidence to work on bigger things. And you don't need to make it open source. There is no point in making it open source. um, a lot of the times people spend countless amount of time trying to make their code perfect and then release to open source, thinking if they don't make it perfect, people is going to criticize. Well, people might criticize if they see it, but like if you're not making it open source, then you can just work on it non-stop without being scared of criticism. So I would say don't waste time with open source. um, I don't think you're gonna make any profit. Don't think you're gonna make any money at all. I don't think you're gonna get recognized. um, like for example, let me give you an example. The Laravel project is open source, right? And the only people that have become famous through open source is just it's very few people in the community that are famous. But they've got famous because they make tutorials and all that stuff, not because of their contribution to the code. You know, last thing you want to say is I contribute to open source project to a recruiter. Well, they don't care about your open source project. What do they care about? They care about a project that you built for a company. Or you can also say this is the project I've been working on weekends, and I think it's a potential. This is the technical complications, and this is the problem this product solves, and da da da. I've written deployment scripts. It has tests. We follow this sort of principle. One of my friends also contributes to it, and da da da. So this is a better story than just saying I contribute to open source. And also another thing is that when working on open source, the only things you're mainly contributing to is is the code itself. You're not involved with the pipelines, you're not involved with the other things, you're not involved in the discussions, um, you're not involved in the future of the project, nothing. All you're doing is pulling the code, you notice some little problem, um, and then you try to discuss that. Well, first of all, you discuss it before you even create a pull request. Then you create a pull request, and then you just wait for someone to merge it, and then most of the time it's not even gonna get merged, unless it's a really small project. If it's a small project and you have trust in the project and you have trust in the person who's running it, and it's small, then it might be worth contributing to it, because eventually if you stick around, the small project is going to become really big, and you will be the person who will understand ins and outs and everything. That way, if it becomes does become big, then you can say, I was one of the main authors of this project, and I've been working on it, contributing to this project for 5 years. This is the project, here's the link, here's all my commits, go have a look. And then you might have a better story to tell recruiters and employers. But other than that, I don't know. If you're thinking to contribute to open source, think about it really. Just think carefully before you just go and waste your time.